Well, good evening, everyone. Happy holidays and all the Christmassy things. I hope you are having a good evening. We are here this evening because Australia recently declassified a series of documents, interviews, papers, things of that nature that they had been collecting on Dr. James E. McDonald. Dr. James E. McDonald was a physicist, MIT grad, very intelligent man who, after investigating aerospace and after having his own personal experience, started researching UFOs. And his story is a kind of a tragic one because he pushes for a lot of what we today call disclosure back in the late 60s. And he received just a ton of ridicule for what he was doing. In fact, one of the videos we're going to watch is about how he received so much ridicule. And it may have been what drove him to his eventual suicide in 1971. This video is useful because it does have his wife's testimony about what she believes happened and contributed to his suicide. We're also going to have a sneak peek at the new Steven Spielberg Disclosure Day trailer, and I would love to get your thoughts on that. So we're going to get into this Dr. McDonald stuff, but first let's take a look at this Disclosure Day trailer from Steven Spielberg, the highly anticipated movie. It's coming out June 12th. And boy, it's just this trailer dropping has gotten a lot of buzz. So check it out, y'all. I mean, what would you do if you heard that? Dang. Okay, and so far I've seen a cross and a group of nuns and this lady speaking cricket. Oh, well, I'll tell you what, it's Spielberg for sure. I mean, if there's one thing that guy knows how to do is market. So like we just had the Age of Disclosure come out, which was, supposedly a documentary on all these high-level classified people that are going to push for disclosure. That thing was hyped forever. Finally came out, and I guess it was okay. I haven't seen it. But Spielberg releases this film, Disclosure Day, and it's huge. I mean, it's like just the marketing alone is genius. To me, the way people are talking about it is like it's not even a fictional film. I mean, people are talking about it as like it's going to be some kind of real documentary. But I want to remind people that it is a fictional film, that Spielberg is a wonderful filmmaker, and I'm sure it'll be great, but it is fictional. Another thing is, he had a lot of consultants on this film. I believe David Grush was one of them. And something I thought super interesting there. We saw a cross, we saw nuns, we heard a strange language, we saw someone strapped to some machine, and but we didn't see a single UFO or alien. So I think that's quite interesting. Something to note. That Disclosure Day, and we didn't see any UFO craft, and it's a Spielberg. So you think back, like he doesn't shy away from using special effects like that. So I think, like has been proposed by many, that disclosures can be a lot more complicated and a lot different than maybe some of us thought. All right, let's get acquainted with James McDonald. We're going to watch this interview. Now, keep in mind that at the time that this came out, he was on ABC. But ABC at this time, in this instance, is the Australian Broadcasting Network, not the typical ABC we know here in America. So this was a piece that came out, I believe this was 1967. I could be wrong. A few years before his death, when he was out there trying to tell people, hey, this is something legitimate that we can study. And one thing we're going to get to later is there was an actual FBI file on James McDonald. I mean, so there's a lot to this gentleman who has kind of flown under the radar for a lot of us in this field. And I think we can learn a lot from Dr. McDonald that can be applied even today. Let's check out this piece on the Australian Broadcasting Network about James McDonald and his
UFOs,
studies.
unidentified scientific objects, have been one of the great scientific bugaboos of the last decade. Say you've seen one and you're ridiculed, or at least that's the way it used to be. Nowadays, while there are still plenty of scoffers and jeerers, you're more likely to be listened to, and an increasing amount of scientific investigation is being conducted. In Australia at the moment is Professor James McDonald, Professor of Meteorology at the University of Arizona. Officially, he was working for the US Navy, but in his spare time he's checking many Australian reports of UFOs and comparing them with American reports. His aim is to see if the reports tally, in short, whether UFOs constitute a global phenomenon. In Melbourne, he's talking with Brian King.
Professor McDonald, what have you found here that's been of use to you?
I've investigated about 50 or 60 cases since I came down to New Zealand and Australia. Extremely interesting UFO sightings. A lot of help from local investigatory groups in Sydney and Melbourne, and have found as I go through these that the type of sightings are essentially similar to those in the United States.
What are the main similarities?
Persons of really quite high credibility reporting unconventional objects, discs, cigar-shaped objects, frequently at very low elevation, hovering over sometimes urban areas, sometimes over cars, following cars. Same kind of public reaction, quite a strong similarity to the American reluctance to report them to official channels because of fear of ridicule. But behind it all, a very large number, a very surprisingly large number of these sightings of quite unconventional objects maneuvering in our airspace.
You have been highly critical of your own government's attitude towards UFOs.
Indeed I have, yes. I've taken a very good look at the American official investigation program, Project Blue Book, run by the Air Force, and I have quite unequivocally described it to scientific colleagues back in the States as superficial and incompetent.
Why has the government taken this attitude, in your opinion?
It's not a brief story, but it goes back to 1953 when a CIA-involved investigation was held. As a result of the extremely heavy wave of sightings in 1952, the CIA and Air Force became so concerned over the sheer number of reports that were tying up American intelligence channels, that they wanted to get this signal out of the system, asked the Air Force, the CIA asked the Air Force for a debunking policy. The literal wording was to debunk the flying saucers, to decrease public interest in the UFOs. Regulations were promulgated very shortly that made it a crime punishable with, I think it's $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison to release any information at airbase level on UFOs. And as a result of that, in a sequence of steady downgrading, the whole problem has been essentially lost from scientific sight in the U.S., and nothing resembling any scientific investigation has been going on in the past 15 years.
Has this been typical of the attitude of most world governments?
As nearly as I can tell, yes. There seems to be quite surprising similarity between the official Russian, British, Australian, Canadian, American, French, Italian pronouncements. They all seem to take the view that there's nothing to it, that it's a lot of nonsense, that people see things, and that it is not a real scientific problem at all. And I most heartily disagree with that.
You have been as far as the United Nations with this problem.
Yes, about 2-3 weeks ago, on the 7th of this month, of June, nearly a month ago now, I spoke to the Outer Space Affairs Group in the United Nations, urging immediate UN action on this problem. It seems to me that the UN is one of the best places to tackle the international, the global aspects of the UFO problem, and all evidence now points to its being a truly global phenomenon.
U Thant made a statement at the time.
I didn't get to see U Thant. That was a busy day, June 7th. In fact, I had a date to see him at 4 o'clock, and if there was any 1 hour that was the peak of the Mideast crisis, 4 o'clock was it. So I unfortunately didn't get to see U Thant. But quite recently, a few days ago, I got a phone call from San Francisco pointing out that he had made a statement to Drew Pearson, an American columnist, that aside from the Vietnamese War, the UFO problem is the greatest international problem. And I sent him a wire strongly endorsing his position, but disagreeing with him to the extent of saying that I believe it's the most important international problem.
Why?
We have in the UFO problem a very strange situation. Here for 20 years plus, essentially similar phenomena have been reported all over the world, large numbers in the U.S., officialdom ignoring them, Air forces ignoring them, and yet apparently a steady increase in the numbers of reliable reports from people in all walks of life seeing these objects that are not products of our technology, that are not meteorological astronomical phenomena, hovering at low altitude, increasing numbers in urban areas, and collectively we don't know what's going on. That's an extremely unwise situation, no matter how you view it. We do not know what is involved in this problem. There are no strong indications of anything resembling hostility. I see some faint indications of hazard and danger, but in general, to have this possibility that the world is under something resembling reconnaissance, possibly from some extraterrestrial source, and to go on about our petty ways collectively doesn't seem to me to be a wise situation. So I'm trying to get scientists and governmental agencies to take a look at this at a highly accelerated pace.
Professor McDonald, thank you very much.
Professor McDonald talking with Brian.
I mean, that sounds incredibly ahead of his time. The professor is sitting there saying, look, there is no explanation for these things. They are real. We do see them. There are multiple reports from credible people. And goes on to talk about maybe we're under some extraterrestrial reconnaissance. Like, that is incredible. Because that's very similar to, you know, things that we see here and things that we see right now. Sorry, I'm having some camera issues apparently. Okay. Okay, so yes, these are things that we hear from present day researchers right now. Dr. McDonald had his own experience with UFOs, and I believe it was an orb, and we'll get into that. When Dr. McDonald refers to Project Blue Book, he investigated one claim specifically. In fact, that is shown right here. And what's interesting about, let me get it pulled up so I can read it here on my end. And actually, this is not the right paper. Here we go. Okay. I'm sorry about that, y'all. So you see it's on the University of Arizona letterhead. He was a professor there. And this is dated July 14th, 1966. And this was his review of what Project Blue Book put together for the Pentagon and for the public regarding this B-36 incident. Now, I had to go and look this up. It was a while ago. But apparently, in the mid-50s, the B-36 was the largest aircraft to carry a nuclear weapon. It was huge. They called it the Flying Fortress, essentially. It was the largest nuclear-capable strategic bomber in the world at the time. So, in the 1950s, right at the peak of the Cold War, you have this gigantic nuclear bomber manned with trained, personnel, U.S. Air Force personnel. And you had multiple members of the crew, not just one, multiple members of the crew report a large, bright object pacing with and maneuvering around the bomber. It hung with the bomber for several minutes. This wasn't just like a flyby, real quick sighting. This thing looked like it was flying in formation with the bomber, according to the witnesses. It maintained a formation-like proximity to the bomber. It executed maneuvers inconsistent with known aircraft, things that we hear today with our fighter pilots flying what they're flying today in way more advanced aircraft. And it displayed extreme speed and controlled motion. Now, the thing that was really important to McDonald was the fact that this whole crew had seen it. It wasn't just like the pilot saw it or the gunner saw it. There were multiple members of the crew that saw it. And these were not hobbyists. These were trained Air Force professionals. And in the operational context, it's a nuclear bomber on mission. And we hear about the entities being attracted to nuclear sites. Well, this is just one more instance, I'm sure, that is added on to that, where they are literally flying alongside of, within formation, and along with this bomber for over 7 minutes. And the performance exceeded anything we had in the 50s. So just like we hear Greer talk about the Tic Tac exceeding any kind of performance we have today, same exact thing back then. One thing McDonald argued was that misidentification explanations fail when they're applied to relative motion, controlled pacing, duration, and the proximity to the aircraft. Blue Book gave a prosaic explanation for what those airmen saw. They said it was an astronomical object, or in some cases, a misperception of what they were seeing. McDonald said the explanations were retrofitted and not derived from the actual data. The crew testimony was downplayed and in some cases omitted, and the performance characteristics of the craft were outright ignored. So one thing McDonald would do is he would use that B-36 case as an example of systematic failure in official UFO investigations. And it has to make you wonder if it is a systematic failure on purpose. And when there is a real UFO investigation, if that gets handed off to some type of specialized team. You almost hope so. Otherwise, we're really turning a blind eye and have been turning a blind eye to this phenomena for a long time. The B-36 was part of a nuclear deterrence force. That is a fact. Any unknown object near it should have triggered serious national security concerns. But instead, the case was closed and there was hardly any analysis given to it. And that contradiction itself became central to a lot of McDonald's claims that UFOs were not being scientifically investigated. They were being administratively disposed of. So the B-36 incident is very similar to the Nimitz, the Roosevelt, because you had multi-sensor tracking, you had credible military witnesses, and then you had a rapid dismissal of the case despite all of the data that was given. The problem was not the lack of evidence. It was the lack of will. And that is what McDonald argued. He had some great papers he put out, some great theories he put out. And also, there's been some kind of, excuse me, my son's decided to yell on screen. He's also had some, post-mortem briefings and meetings about his work during his time. So we're going to start out. This is 1967.
Professor McDonald recorded his talk in Sydney on a recent visit to Australia, New Zealand and Tasmania to investigate UFO sightings in this part of the world. Professor James E. McDonald.
I suppose one good place to begin with my remarks on the UFO problem is to tell you briefly why I happen to be down in Australia, New Zealand, and Tasmania, why I've been studying this problem of the Australian UFO sightings. It comes to this. I've spent about 12, 13 months in the States in interviewing witnesses in key cases, attempting to unravel this very puzzling and very intriguing mystery. One of the questions that keeps coming up is the question of, are there sightings of essentially the same type in other parts of the world? Well, it turns out that there are large numbers of reports in the publications of various private UFO investigating groups in England, America, Australia, France, and so on, that quite clearly indicate that. But certainly as a scientist, I am not entirely happy with taking hearsay evidence, and I've been down here in Australia interviewing witnesses to find out for myself in direct face-to-face or in some cases phone interviewing exactly what happened in individual cases and what the credibility of the witness is, how witnesses may be, how thoroughly the cases have been checked, and so on down the line. And just to very briefly indicate what I've found in that investigation, it's this. The picture in Australia with respect to UFO sightings, observations of unconventional objects maneuvering, sometimes quite close to ground, sometimes within tens to hundreds of feet of very credible, reliable observers, is just not appreciably different in Australia, New Zealand, and Tasmania from what it is in the States. A very strong similarity. There's just a little bit of evidence that indicates to me there may even be a few more sightings per square mile or per capita here than in the States. But I wouldn't stand firmly on that feeling that I've gotten. One thing I have noticed is that lots of witnesses, after 15 or 20 or 30 minutes of interviewing them, bring up the point that several other friends of theirs have also seen objects at close range. Sometimes I've been able to check these. Sometimes I just put it aside as evidence that there are other reports.
Now, one thing we have to remember is that excuse me, he is taking these reports very seriously and documenting these reports and scientifically analyzing these reports at a time when you could literally get laughed out of a building for just saying that you are interested in UFOs. It had become that controversial. It had become that looked down upon that to even research it meant that you were lacking in mental capability.
The thing I'm doing is taping. I have about 10,000 feet of tape I noticed when I wound this thing up, and have interviewed about 70 Australians or New Zealanders. I've been down to Hobart, Tasmania, some extremely interesting cases in Tasmania. And the problem is to try to find out what has happened in these cases. There's a great deal of reluctance to report them. That's exactly the same in the States as it seems to be down here. People have been ridiculed and made fun of by official groups, by press and radio and television.
Ridiculed by people, press, radio, television. This is a theme throughout his career. And what's interesting is, why is this interview on the UFO archives, or that's where it was basically sourced from, why did the Australian government believe this was important enough to hold on to, important enough to file away and keep somewhere? Clearly there was some knowledge here that they wanted to hang on to.
And scientists, too. There's been a great deal of completely unbased, I emphasize that, scorning and scoffing about this problem, and that's driven the problem underground. Just the same kind of comments. You ask people, did you ever report it? Did you ever report it to the United States Air Force? Or down here, did you report it to the RAF? And the answer is typically no. Did you report it to the press? Well, sometimes they did, and one woman that I interviewed not so long ago pointed out that she described her case in some detail. The reporter asked her why she didn't use more water in what she'd been drinking. She was quite incensed, and I would agree with that. Well, this whole attitude of ridicule has been engendered, and I'm afraid greatly encouraged by the American Air Force investigation, Project Blue Book, which has been in operation for about 14 years and which is presented, certainly within the States, and I've learned down here, regarded quite highly in other parts of the world, and that's completely unjustified. I've taken an extremely good look at the official Project Blue Book investigation, and to put it briefly, it's been done superficially and by persons of extremely low scientific competence. It has to be regarded as essentially zero. It is not a scientific investigation. For instance, when I got started looking into this problem intensively about a year ago and got in there, it came as a great surprise to me to find out that Project Blue Book, the American UFO investigation headquarters project, consists of a major, a sergeant, and a secretary. Imagine that. When you contrast that with the kind of press releases that are put out about the great expertise that's used, the thorough...
So a major, a sergeant, and a secretary. So at this point, 67, he goes and looks in further to Project Blue Book, that document we were looking at earlier that we'll go back to. We'll review some of it. But I just wanted to give you all his voice, some perspective. So he's saying he goes there to check this out. There's a major, right? So you got your officer. There's a sergeant, so you got your NCO, and there's a secretary, so you got your enlisted person. 3 people staffing Project Blue Book. And this 3-person staff is releasing these definitive findings on UFOs.
Investigations, and the indication is only 2 or 3% of unknowns, and probably those would be explained, the Air Force insists, if they had a little more data. When you contrast the pronouncements, the assurances that there's nothing to it, with the very low level at which it's actually been investigated, when you compare the official explanations with the details of the reports, and then go back and check them yourself as I've done, you end up, as I have ended up, with a conclusion that this problem has been completely lost sight of in America, and perhaps it's not unjustified to suggest that in other parts of the world, the large amounts of money that seem to be at the disposal of our Air Force are misconstrued as indicating we've probably done a very large, very extensive, very thorough study of the problem. That is absolutely incorrect. Well, the type of sightings that are on record, thousands of cases in the U.S., involve cigar-shaped objects, discs, hovering, sometimes at very low altitude. There's a wide range.
So he said cigar-shaped objects before discs, which is interesting because the era that I grew up in, little kid in the 80s, preteen, teenager, older kid in the 90s, UFOs were discs. Like, I don't ever remember hearing about cigars. None of the X-File episodes that I can recall had a cigar or a Tic Tac or a pill or whatever you want to call it. But here's McDonald in 67 talking about cigar-shaped UFO before he mentions a disc.
Of other phenomena, I won't take time to give you all the details. Many inexplicable, scientifically inexplicable, baffling phenomena, very high accelerations, sometimes high-speed objects moving without any obvious sonic booms, though I'd hasten to interject that sometimes there are unexplained sonic booms that could be UFOs. Many peculiar luminous phenomena, and some of them down in Australia will really baffle every scientist who ever takes a look at these. Same thing in the United States. But mainly cigar-shaped objects and disc-shaped objects maneuvering in our airspace and written off by official groups as non-existent, just as if it was a lot of nuts seeing things, a lot of people who can't be trusted. When you go out and talk to the people, you find that, yes, there are some incompetent people who have seen something and haven't quite identified it. There are certainly nuts. There's certainly in the United States, there's a very annoyingly visible cultist crackpot fringe that's grown up around the problem, and that discolors it and puts a lot of scientists off. Very true. And there are completely sincere misidentifications of planets and balls, lightning, fireballs, luminous phenomena of one type or another, even aircraft and so on. But experienced investigators, such as those that have been working in Sydney and Melbourne and Tasmania and in other parts of the world, these are private investigating groups, not the official groups. The official groups, it's very hard to know what to say about them. They come out with such outrageously absurd explanations that one is really hard put to know how to sort that out. But these sightings that are being investigated include a lot of quite unconventional phenomena that are not any product of our technology or Australian or Russian or English technology. They are not plasma phenomena. They are not sundogs and pelicans and all the rest of the things that one hears about. They are beyond the present pale of science, and they're being ignored by science, being ignored by official groups, and that has got to change very, very rapidly. The question arises, what are these UFOs, the ones that pass the test of not being put aside as fireballs and planets? So what could they be? And that, of course, is the ultimately important question. Not easy to offer an answer. One can only consider hypotheses, guesses, big ifs in front of all of them. But when you look at these various hypotheses, psychological, advanced technology, hoax, fabrication, fraud, poorly understood geophysical phenomena, you run through all of those. This is certainly what I've done in the past year of checking. You find yourself ending up with the seemingly absurd, seemingly improbable hypothesis that these things may be coming from somewhere else. And just where that is a great big question mark. All that we know about the astronomy, planetary meteorology of the solar system seems to argue against a planetary, that is, intra-solar system origin of the objects. All that we know about the structure of the galaxy makes quite clear that the next nearest source of origin is quite an embarrassing number of light years away. And when you confront that distance and look at it in terms of present-day terrestrial technology of propulsion, we're just beginning, of course, so to speak. We're just beginning in that business on Earth, and that has to be kept in mind. But when you look at it in terms of present-day or foreseeable propulsion techniques, it's very, very baffling. Essentially,
it's the same stuff they have a problem trying to figure out today, which is if the nearest life source is millions or billions of light years away, even with the most advanced technology, how are they covering that space in the amount of time that they are? Or are we looking at it completely wrong? Like, we know time and space, at least we think we know time and space are the same thing. But are we viewing it completely wrong? There seems to be a lot of attention on using this element of psionics or this advanced network, being able to plug into this network. Is that how you travel light years and light years away? It's hard to say, but it's very interesting to hear that the same problems that baffled the scientists in '67 are essentially the same things that are baffling them today in 2025, almost 2026.
Not possible to explain how any kind of objects, surveillance probes or what have you, could be got into the Earth's environment from an extrasolar, that is, across interstellar distances. But the rub there, the thing to keep your eye on, seems to me, is the proviso in terms of our present knowledge or foreseeable technology. you've got to realize, and actually I find many laymen, I really find laymen more aware of this than some fellow scientists, more sensitive to it. You have to realize that given another 100 years or 1,000 years, terrestrial technology will be an entirely different thing from what it is now. It's a safe extrapolation because you have only to look back 100 years and things like radio, television, lasers, nuclear fusion, fission, countless other technological devices and systems that we take for granted now were, of course, incredible 100-odd years ago. And 100 years.
Right. And can you imagine if you were to hand these guys an iPhone right now? Their mind would literally explode. So it's not hard to believe that in 100 or 1,000 years, we may be able to develop some type of technology that would allow for that type of travel to happen. And if we can expound on that, then we can believe that there may be other civilizations that are just that much further ahead of us that have already done that.
Years is just nothing, just a twinkling of an eye in galactic, even geologic time standards. So it is entirely conceivable, in fact it's almost probable, that elsewhere in the galaxy are advanced civilizations. In fact, this becomes fairly respectable to say this nowadays. It's generally granted by astronomers that far from here, in the reaches of the galaxy, there must be other societies that are essentially sentient beings whose technologies have swept far beyond ours. But what nobody grants and what everybody stalls on and blocks their further thoughts on with respect to UFOs is nobody thinks they can get here. Well, I don't have any answers to that. I certainly want to emphasize that. I haven't the slightest idea how anything could get here from say, Tau Cetai or Epsilon or Rideni or anything 10 or 15 light years away. But I'm afraid, in looking at the situation, looking at Australian, American, and other sightings, examining the credibility of the observers, looking at the content of these observations, I'm afraid that it boils down to craft of some kind, machine-like objects that have been around for 20 years, ignored by all of us scientists, swept aside and ridiculed, and nobody has any good knowledge of this problem. All these years have been wasted scientifically. We've got to get at this right away, got to get on it on a global scale, and with the best scientific talent, not just in the United States or not just in Australia, but the world's best scientific talent has to get on that. I suppose
have to get on that. In other words, this is a freaking problem because we have these craft, and he mentions there at 67 when they've had them for 20 years, and nobody's taking it seriously. At least nobody that he knows is taking it seriously, and he's being ridiculed and laughed out of rooms because of his stance on these things.
Along these lines, only a short time ago, this summer, in the United Nations at the Outer Space Affairs Group, presented a statement to the Outer Space Affairs Group urging immediate UN action on the problem. I was very pleased to see that it had some effect. By the way, I also sent copies of that statement to about 60 embassies in Washington, 60 foreign embassies, care of their scientific attachés, hoping to stimulate more interest in any and all parts of the world. I didn't get a chance to talk to Todd. I had a date to see him, but it was right in the middle of the Security Council crisis, and he couldn't see me. I'm going to try again to see him. But only a very short time ago, a very interesting statement was made by Todd to Drew Pearson that the problem of the UFOs, now this is the Secretary General of the United Nations speaking, saying that the problem of the UFOs is the greatest international problem, second only to the present one of the Vietnam War. I think that's very interesting. I cabled in from Australia when I heard that by long-distance phone call from San Francisco. I cabled Secretary General Utant and strongly endorsed his statement, except I expressed disagreement. In my opinion, the UFO problem is the greatest scientific problem, the greatest international problem that stands before us.
Amazing. The greatest scientific problem, the greatest problem essentially that humanity faces right now is the UFO problem. And that was in the late 60s. Now, as I said, at 71, Dr. McDonald committed suicide. This is from Eyes on Cinema, fantastic channel on YouTube. If you're not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe. But we're going to look at this. This is kind of a synopsis of his death, which includes an interview with his wife, before we move on to some of the newer things that came out regarding his research.
The price one pays for investigating UFOs can sometimes be more than 22 years of time spent searching and not finding. There are those who believe that pursuing the UFO question may have cost physicist Dr. James McDonald his career, and perhaps more.
You know, and by 70, see, Daddy committed suicide in 71. So there was the big August 24th. That was 70 or 71. That was right about the time Daddy was suicidal. The big demonstration that we all organized for. So that was, Holbrook was still here when all that happened. And Daddy was doing the SST work then too.
Right. It was the congressional hearing.
That he came back from.
So depressed by.
Mm-hmm. And so then when he committed suicide, I went that August to the Oberlin. That's the first Oberlin I went to. I guess people told me to go. And that's when I met Leah and George Novak. He introduced me to Leah. I was 71 in August. That's when I began to go towards the Socialist Workers' Party. And then in 72, I went to join the party in San Francisco. So, and I had that awful, affair with Makoviak, which was a big mistake.
Now you met him through the center?
Yeah, down there, Really.
And he was in the Communist Party?
Yeah, but
he
he
didn't
was.
know that? Or?
Oh, he was a betrayal type of person. He lied to me that he wasn't in the Communist Party. He was in our Young Socialist group. It's Holbrook. At the same time, he was in the Communist Party, which no principled person. I mean, that would be just, yeah. So that was a big mistake, getting seduced off into that sector. And it was very bad.
But that didn't end until after Daddy was dead, right?
Yeah.
Not that long after. Kind of blew up.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was very bad. Very sad. Yeah. Daddy used that as an excuse to commit suicide, but he was suicidal. Anyway, that was...
Was he in a kind of suicidal period before that happened, or did that kind of triggered it?
Well, before that, he was he was suicidal.
Was he having another one of his work slumps? Couldn't work?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was all very sad, very hard, very difficult period for everybody, I'm sure.
Dr. James McDonald was a good example of what ridicule can do to people who are involved with UFO research, especially if they have credentials. Devoted a good part of his life to investigating UFO reports, sightings, writing them up, speaking at scientific and non-scientific groups all over the country and in different parts of the world.
Another thing that's common all over the world is the scoffing and ridicule from official sources, from my fellow scientists, largely, well, almost entirely.
He was respected by UFO researchers, but his peers sort of looked askance at what he was doing. When he was a witness or giving testimony at congressional hearings on what the SST, the supersonic transport, might do to the ozone layer, one of the congressmen brought up the fact that he was interested in UFOs and researching UFOs, and sort of made a fool out of this very brilliant man.
No one can say with certainty what it was that finally broke James McDonald's spirit. But the ridicule he endured for taking UFOs seriously cannot have helped him in his struggle with his own personal demons. In the early morning of June 13th, 1971, Dr. James McDonald walked into the Arizona desert. An hour before dawn, he put a gun to his head and ended his life. Dr. James McDonald, a ghostly presence who stands at the door to the UFO mystery, greeting us with this reminder: beware all those who enter here.
One of my ufological heroes is Dr. James E. McDonald. He was a highly respected atmospheric physicist who attempted to bring the subject of UFOs to the serious attention of both the American public and the established scientific community, much to the detriment of both his professional reputation and personal life. His lectures and writings, which are still available online and in print, ring with passion, insight, intelligence, and anger, and are as timely now as they were back then. He alleged that the members of the National Academy of Science and it's alleged that this member of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Meteorological Society, and the Institute for Atmospheric Physics was murdered, and that the murder was made to look like a suicide. This is the definitive biography on McDonald. It was written by the great Ann Druffel, California resident and now maybe the most senior living UFO researcher. It is superb. It's one of the finest biographies I've ever read, not to mention one of the finest UFO biographies ever written. James McDonald.
So the accusation there that it was made to look like a suicide is interesting. So the researcher that he mentions, Ann Druffel, was part of this expo in 2004. It was the Exopolitics Expo. And Ann Druffel wrote the book, Fight for UFO Science, I believe is what it was called, about Dr. James McDonald and the accusation that he perhaps was murdered and committed suicide. Instead of committing suicide, it was made to look like a suicide. Now, what's interesting is in the 05 Expo, his wife, who we just heard in that video testify that he was depressed and suicidal, is in the 2005 Expo, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But here's Ann Druffel at the 2004 Exopolitics Expo talking about Dr. James McDonald. And before they get going again, I just find it very interesting. This was held on to by the Australian government.
A little more. Thank you for now. Your next speaker is, of course, Ann Druffel. Ann Druffel is a veteran UFO researcher. She's been active in the UFO research field since 1957. She is the author of the recently published book, which has been receiving rave reviews in the field from numerous sources. The book is Firestorm, Dr. James E. McDonald's Fight for UFO Science. And Ann is, she began investigating sighting reports in Southern California in the late 50s. She has researched over 2,000 Los Angeles Basin reports, including alleged landings, photo cases, close encounters with physical effects on witnesses and terrain, alleged abduction reports, and other extraterrestrial-related phenomena. She's a prolific writer. She's contributed to over 180 articles to numerous journals and magazines. She wrote the book, How to Defend Yourself Against Alien Abductions, and The Psychic and the Detective. She is also a freelancer in various aspects of psychic research. From 1986 to 1991, she worked as research assistant, consultant researcher with the Los Angeles-based parapsychology lab Mobius Society. And she has also written numerous articles on a variety of psychic phenomena and, of course, her books. She raised 5 children while investigating UFOs. It's my pleasure now to welcome Ann Druffel.
Thank you, Cheryl. Does everyone hear me? What you see on the screen is the cover of my book, Firestorm, and it introduces to you Dr. James E. McDonald, a most remarkable scientist. In the spring of 1966, James E. McDonald publicly entered the UFO research field. He set about trying to use his influence in order to convince the scientific establishment that UFOs were a serious question that was being badly neglected. He was a top research scientist with powerful contacts in the government, the military, and the scientific establishment. He fully expected that he could use his impeccable reputation and his research skills to change things around so that the scientific community would launch a well-funded effort to find out and report the truth. He felt strongly, always, that the public had the right to know. Now, during the next 5 years, from 1966 on, his research methods, plus his particular talents and skills, and his remarkable sociable personality, brought him to the very door of disclosure. He tackled the same problems we're all struggling with today. He encountered walls of resistance, such as we encounter, but he possibly got closer to the truth than anyone ever has or has since. Now, next, please. And the media, even the elite media, gave him constant favorable and objective coverage. Most of you here recognize his name and know that he was important historically. And a few of you here tonight knew him personally as I did and worked with him in the field between 1966 and 1971. But a lot of the information in my book, Firestorm, Dr. James E. McDonald's Fight for UFO Science, no one ever knew before. It is an authorized biography of McDonald's UFO research years. When I archived his voluminous UFO files 10 years ago and interviewed dozens of his academic colleagues, I didn't know a lot of the things in the book either, but there they were, tucked away in files that had been guarded by his family for 20 years, and in including 4 handwritten journals that no one even knew existed. The next one. Now, this is the public persona of Jim McDonald. It's the photo he apparently liked best. Actually, it's the one before, I'm sorry, because it's the one he made available to the public whenever they asked. Could you put back the one? I'm sorry. This is his professor look. He was born in Duluth, Minnesota in 1920, and he served in the Navy during World War II in a cryptographic unit in Japan, in the Pacific area during the war with Japan. After the war, he married Betsy Hunt, next one please, who'd been in the Navy too. Now, she told me that she fell in love first with his love for words. They had 6 children, 2 sons and 4 daughters. He got his PhD in physics and meteorology in 1951 and rose quickly in his field. In 1954, next one please, the University of Chicago sent him to establish the new Institute of Atmospheric Physics on the campus of the University of Arizona at Tucson. His office was on the roof closest to the sky. He was the Institute's co-director for the first 2 years, but he wasn't happy administrating. He loved to research and to teach, and so he stepped down to senior physicist, and this was the title he held until his death in 1971. He established the undergraduate and the graduate levels of the meteorology department at the university and guided many students through their own doctoral studies. He was a prodigious writer. Refereed journals like Science and Nature published many of his technical papers, and he presented many papers on cloud physics and climate modification before top scientific groups. Next one, please. But he didn't stop there. His basic philosophy was that science existed to serve the people. And so he also wrote non-technical articles in magazines like Scientific American, explaining complicated concepts like electricity in plain English. He had a way of using words so that anyone could understand him. The most important thing, perhaps, is that McDonald avoided the politics of science and always concentrated on searching out the truth of scientific questions wherever he met them. Consequently, he never fully realized the politics lying behind government non-disclosure. And perhaps this actually helped bring about his early death at the age of 51. Nevertheless, McDonald remains the kind of leader we need today to pursue government disclosure. By studying his experiences with, quote, government resistance, which seemed in his case to amount to an orchestrated attack, we can avoid such tragedies in the future, hopefully. Now, McDonald's professor look that I showed you before, he didn't really look like that. He was one of these people who looked different in different photos. Next, please. This one shows a little bit of his extremely sociable nature. It's from the same photo session as the professor look, but the real McDonald is starting to come through here. I think someone tried to make him laugh here, for he had a sense of humor that was completely unexpected and sometimes totally off the wall. Next, please. Now, this unposed photo is like we remember him. He's gazing out the window of his rooftop office. He was 42 at the time and at the peak of his career. It was 1961, and he was being interviewed about the first controversy in which he had involved himself with the U.S. Air Force. Now, McDonald was bluntly outspoken whenever he saw science being neglected and the American people in danger. And that's why he involved himself in what became known as the Titan missile controversy. McDonald never avoided controversy. He was fearless. He was described as one of the academic colleagues that I interviewed as, quote, a man made out of steel. In 1960, the Air Force began to ring American cities with defensive atomic missiles. Thank you. In case the Cold War with the Soviet Union turned hot. The Air Force wasn't even taking into account the simple fact of prevailing winds. McDonald tried multiple times to try to explain to them, to the government and to the Air Force, that if you put nuclear missiles all around a city, next please, which they did. They put nuclear missiles all around Tucson, and that's where his family lived. And if an enemy launched an attack at those missile sites, there would be nuclear explosions all around the city, and prevailing winds would shower radioactivity all over the city. Now, McDonald tried to tell them that, logically. Missile silos should be placed downwind so that prevailing winds would sweep radioactive debris away from the population. He testified before congressional hearings on these subjects several times, but it was a fight he didn't win at first. The Air Force went ahead and ringed Tucson and a dozen other American cities, but gradually, however, McDonald's logic won out. And by 1963, missile silos were being placed downwind of major American cities. Now, back to his involvement with UFOs. Beginning in 1958, he quietly began investigating UFO reports around Tucson and explained about 98% of Tucson sightings as conventional objects or atmospheric effects. But the remaining 2% he couldn't explain intrigued him. So in the spring of 1966, he publicly entered the UFO field. Nowadays, of course, we have many excellent scientists working in the field. But in 1966, McDonald astonished most of his academic colleagues when he took this public stand. But because they respected him and they respected his work, they let him be. The difference between McDonald and many scientists in the field is that he had academic freedom, which is becoming rarer as the years go by. Next, please. Starting in April 1966, he began speaking publicly on the UFO question before prestigious scientific organizations. Now, this is just one page of a 5-page list. And the next, please. And I've enlarged this so that you can read some of it. The subject, UFOs as a serious scientific question. Now, crowds of scientists came and listened to him with great interest and even began confiding in him that they had seen UFOs themselves, but had never spoken about them to anyone for fear of ridicule. But they gave the reports to McDonald because they trusted him. Now, McDonald was making great headway toward convincing the scientific community at large that UFOs were a serious scientific question, and between 1966 and 71, he gave hundreds of talks before scientific groups in the US, in Canada, and in Australia. McDonald also worked closely with civilian UFO researchers. This had never happened before. A top, prestigious scientist working openly with us. Most of us at the time belonged to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which is called NICAP. And this had been founded in 1956. McDonald had studied the private UFO organizations very carefully and had come to the conclusion that NICAP was doing the best objective research of anyone in the country. So he joined his forces with ours. And NICAP was large. It was 15,000 members at its peak. Now, NICAP was going top speed with a famous author and researcher, Major Donald E. Kehoe, as its director. McDonald and Kehoe became good friends and colleagues. Kehoe was the first objective researcher on UFOs. Next, please. He wrote 4 books on the subject. The first one was Flying Saucers Are Real, which was printed in 1950. McDonald checked out Kehoe's research very carefully, and he came to the conclusion that, quote, Kehoe has his facts straight. He predicted that someday Kehoe would be recognized as the true dean of ufology. Now, NICAP was the largest civilian UFO research organization ever. Its publications included a newsletter, The UFO Investigator, and books. Next, please. Like The UFO Evidence and UFOs, A New Look. From its beginning, it sought open congressional hearings on the UFO question. And by 1960, it convinced Representative Leonard Wolf, next please, to talk publicly on the subject for the congressional record. NICAP, like McDonald, concentrated on one basic fact, that there were unidentified craft-like objects flying around Earth's atmosphere, being caught on radar, chased by jet pilots, and seen by groups of reliable witnesses, such as military personnel, traffic control operators, and policemen. NICAP did not concentrate on reports of UFO occupants and their possible motives. In speaking before hundreds of scientific audiences, McDonald never addressed the question of UFO occupants. He figured that once the scientific community understood the basic fact that UFOs existed, they would set up a tracking system involving the military, the scientific sources, the government, hopefully, and the public, all working together publicly, openly, to track UFOs, and that in this way, the scientific fact of their physical existence would be proven beyond a doubt. NICAP, is there something wrong with the microphone? Pardon? No sound. Shall I wait to see if they can fix it, or just speak louder?
Okay. Well, they worked that out. We did have some interesting breaking news. So this gentleman, Professor Nuno Loureiro, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, was a physicist and scientist and professor at MIT. Here he is speaking.
Nuno Loureiro. I'm a professor at MIT. My main appointment is in nuclear science and engineering. I have a joint appointment in the physics department. I'm also director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, which is an umbrella research center at MIT for all the plasma and fusion-related activities that we do on campus. Many of these plasmas that we study, they have magnetic fields. Essentially, magnetic reconnection is a nonlinear phenomenon that happens in a plasma where the magnetic field decides to rearrange into a different configuration. And in doing so, it releases a lot of energy. The best known example of magnetic reconnection are solar flares. And there's many manifestations of reconnection. There's many interesting issues associated with magnetic reconnection. So that's what I study. Well, plasmas are essentially nonlinear media. So if you have electrons...
So plasma, magnetics, electrons, murdered.
Breaking news out of Brookline, an MIT professor shot and killed at his home on Gibb Street. Hello, and thank you for joining us on CBS News Boston. I'm Cheryl Fiandaca. 47-year-old Nuno Loureiro was a nuclear scientist and engineering professor. He was shot several times in the foyer of his Brookline home. Let's get out to WBZ's Penny Commit live in Brookline right now with the latest on this breaking story. Penny?
Well, Cheryl, just less than an hour ago, I spoke with the Brookline Police Department, and they tell us no one is in custody. So this shooter, it seems likely, is still out there. Neighbors, understandably, very shaken up by this. They tell us that the 47-year-old MIT professor lived in this building right here. He lived on the first floor, they tell us, in that corner apartment building. Here's what else they had to say.
At about 9 o'clock, I heard 3 loud bangs. I thought at first it was somebody in our apartment kicking in the door or something. So I called the neighbors, and they said no, they thought it was gunshots. And so we came out, and the police had already arrived, and they took him away. We didn't even know who it was or what had happened.
They've identified the victim now. It's Nuno.
Yeah, unfortunately.
What do you know about
terrible.
Nuno?
He's a neighbor, and a good neighbor, right? Quiet. They've been living here for quite a while, and next door, and nice folks.
He's from Portugal. Yeah. He's from Portugal.
He lives right next door?
Yeah, they live right here, on the first floor.
And Nuno's an MIT professor?
That's what I understand, yeah.
Nuclear scientist?
Is he?
Yeah, that's what it says on the website.
Oh, man.
What do you think about this taking place, sir? Right next to you. Brookline's not known for crimes like this.
Yeah, I think that it's really a surprise. And a shooting in a state where it's so hard to even have a gun? I hope they find out what it was all about, and whoever did it is apprehended.
It was our car.
Wow. So neighbor, as soon as he hears nuclear scientist, you saw the change in his body language, like, oh shit. Then immediately it's to the conclusive, like, damn, well, it's hard to get guns around here. This is getting really kind of fishy.
Car parked the wrong way out here, did you notice?
Well, I didn't see it, but other people saw it. It was parked right about here, apparently, and it was parked in the wrong direction, and it seemed to be waiting. So I don't know.
This is before the shooting?
I'm not exactly sure of what the story is. The police were very thorough. They came by and interviewed everybody a couple of times.
It's unnerving, isn't it?
You bet.
What's your
Did
name?
you see anything in the lobby? We heard reports of like shell casings in the lobby. Did you see anything like that?
Well, that's what the kind of thing they show on TV.
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose the police have done investigating, and they've started to put together whatever it is, a scenario or whatever they do of what happened. Certainly they haven't mentioned anything to us. So.
Can you tell me one more time where he lived?
First floor.
And Cheryl, while we were hearing from those neighbors, we saw investigators wearing gloves and carrying what looks like thin bags of evidence coming from behind the apartment building here. We've also seen officers this morning going door to door, and last night neighbors tell us that they swarmed the area.
Thanks, Penny. It sounds like with those neighbors, it's a lot of concern there. Tell us a little bit about, that street and that neighborhood.
They're certainly concerned. This is Brookline. It's North Brookline. This is typically a very safe area. Things like this do not happen in this area of town, and they're really mourning this loss. A lot of people telling us they didn't know the victim personally, but knew of him, that he had a family. Actually, a woman on this house over here posted a sign to her door asking that all neighbors at around 7 o'clock tonight put a candle in their window facing Gibbs Street here to honor this MIT professor. So very melancholic attitude here. And again, just...
Wow. So we share that because, as we're covering Dr. McDonald, his biographer, Andrew Fell, that is what she implies, was that although he was apparently suicidal, he went out into a desert in 1971 and he was murdered. He didn't shoot himself. And, it's not like he would be the first scientist researching this subject that had a suicide that was questionable. I don't think you can count them on two hands at this point. There have been so many. And then we have the testimony of David Grush saying, yes, people have been hurt, murdered, not only by actors in our government or other governments, private industry, what have you, but by NHI themselves, which is very concerning. Okay, so back to Anne Dreffel on James McDonald. And then what's interesting is next. Remember I said they had this Expo in 04, and then they had it in 05. In 05, Stanton Freeman, Brian Chrissy, Stephen Bassett, and even his wife, Betsy McDonald, sit in on that one. So we're going to finish up here with with Anne, and then we're going to jump over to the 05 Expo where his own wife, Betsy, sat in and gave some perspective.
The idea should be funded with $500,000 of taxpayers' money. On the 7th of April, there was a public announcement, and the National Academy of Sciences that same day told McDonald that they couldn't fund his study after all. This was the first of many coincidental roadblocks which were placed in McDonald's way, but it didn't stop him. But was it a coincidence? As we go along further, you can judge for yourself. McDonald's friends in high places confidentially told him that he was at the head of the list of academics in universities throughout the country to be chosen for the new Air Force study. He waited, but he didn't hear anything more. Next, please. In his early investigations around Tucson, he came across a startling 1952 encounter between an Air Force B-36 and two large, round, metallic objects which paced the plane over Tucson. The case so intrigued him that in June 1966, he took a 2-day trip to Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, intending to track down this B-36 case and other sightings that he was interested in. His first trip to Blue Book was an eye-opener. Its staff, 3 persons, as you know. As he went through the files, he was shocked to find that many good cases had been written off as stars, mirages, and other illogical explanations by Blue Book scientific consultant J. Allen Hynek. He put the whole Blue Book staff to work, including Hector Quintanilla, trying to find the Tucson B-36 case that he was interested in. They found 9 other B-36 Air Force encounters, but not the one he was looking for. And other important cases that he knew about were not in the files either. We know now why they weren't, but in 1966, McDonald didn't know, and neither did we. McDonald went over Quintanilla's head to Dr. Anthony Casiopo, the chief scientist of the Foreign Technology Division, and then went up higher to General Cruikshank, who was head of the entire FTD. McDonald told General Cruikshank, and I quote from his journal, "The Air Force is in a bad spot with the incompetence at Project Blue Book. You're going to have a lot of trouble getting out of it." Perhaps this alerted the government that McDonald was going to be a force to reckon with. For shortly afterward, strange things began to happen to him, which amounted to what I call in the book an orchestrated attack. He made 4 trips to Blue Book, and Cruikshank upgraded the Blue Book staff with a meteorologist, a physicist, and a technical engineer. And General Cruikshank also offered McDonald a consultancy. No strings attached. He'd be able to use whatever he learned any way he wished. Now that offer was abruptly withdrawn with no explanation. He continued on a volunteer basis anyway with the new Blue Book consultants, and for a while he thought he was making headway. But within a few weeks, the 3 new consultants were called to meetings at the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, California, to discuss UFOs. Then they simply disappeared from Blue Book and were assigned elsewhere. McDonald queried Rand about this, and Rand Corporation denied in a letter that they'd never discussed UFOs at all. Now, this was another government lie, because the Rand report on UFOs has been declassified. General Cruikshank was reassigned too, abruptly, and McDonald couldn't even find out where he'd been transferred. All of this seems to have been political maneuvering, part of the government cover-up. But this did not occur to McDonald. It's apparent that McDonald was too effective in his efforts to bring about change and had to be stopped at every turn. But he continued on. He wrote dozens of papers on the UFO question, which were distributed widely in the UFO field and in the scientific community. But scientific journals to which he presented them always refused to publish them. Next, please. He spoke before the UN on the subject of UFOs. He interacted with more influential people in the government and the military and the scientific community than anyone ever has done or has since. And the media, even members of the elite media, gave him constant, objective publicity. In spite of his UFO research, McDonald never neglected his academic and professional work. He simply added UFO research to his life and continued his climatology and meteorology work. He continued to participate in climate modification projects with the Office of Naval Research and the National Academy of Science. He was virtually tireless. Afterwards, the Air Force dropped the university team approach and chose a single university with a single scientist to head the new government study, the so-called Condon Committee. Now, Dr. Edward U. Condon, in the Air Force's words, could be completely objective. That is, this meant that Condon didn't know anything about UFOs and had no interest in them. McDonald respected Condon's reputation, however, and he hoped that Condon would become interested in the UFO question. So Condon chose a good staff generally, and they went to work at the University of Colorado, as you know. The staff was virtually all neophytes as far as UFOs were concerned. McDonald provided a list of 100 cases which held out promise that physical evidence might be gleaned from them. He worked closely with Condon's staff on a volunteer basis, sharing all available data that came to him, and also NICAP, APRO, and other organizations did the same for Condon. McDonald was convinced that the UFO phenomenon was real. McDonald was convinced that the UFO phenomenon was real, but he knew that more evidential data was needed to convince other scientists. He concentrated on cases that held out promise of physical evidence, such as radar visual sightings and reputable daylight photos, next please, which showed features on the craft, like the Heflin photos taken in Orange County in 1965. McDonald studied photos like this for years. In June 1967, he traveled to Australia on professional business, connected with one of his Office of Naval Research contracts. His contract monitor, James Hughes, said it was okay if he used his spare time investigating UFO cases down under. He met with Australian and New Zealand researchers and investigated the best Australian cases. He gave talks about UFOs at scientific meetings there. And at the end, next please, at the end of his 3-week visit, he appeared on Australian TV and radio. And this is McDonald on the right there with reporter John Pierce. He looked so happy and hopeful. This was typical McDonald. But while he was there, he made one little mistake. He criticized Project Blue Book on Australian television. Now, it's one thing for an American to criticize the Air Force on American soil, but you don't do it on foreign soil. Certain skeptics, like Phil Klass, demanded to know why, in Phil's words, why McDonald was permitted to spend Navy funds on a frivolous subject like UFO research. The Office of Naval Research insisted that McDonald hadn't misused any Navy funds, and the University of Arizona backed him up too. Finally, bowing to pressure coming from above, the Navy terminated that particular Navy contract of McDonald's. There's good evidence in his journals to indicate that it was the Department of Defense that made the Navy cave in. Now let's backtrack a little. From 1957 to 1962, Don Kehoe and NICAP had worked incessantly to bring about open congressional hearings on the subject of UFOs, and finally succeeded in having one scheduled in 1962. Then those plans were abruptly squashed by none other than Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter. Now, Hillenkotter was a prominent NICAP board member and ostensibly a very good friend of Don Kehoe's. But as you know, Hillenkotter is listed as a member of MJ-12. Next, please. But finally, in July 1968, over the objections of the Air Force and through the sheer force of his personality, McDonald helped bring about an open hearing. In a congressional subcommittee, the proceedings were printed by the Government Printing Office. 6 reputable scientists participating, including McDonald, J. Allen Hynek, who had come aboard by that time, and Carl Sagan, who at that time was not an avowed skeptic. Next, please. Oh, wait a minute, sorry. No. Now, McDonald hoped that the proceedings printed by the Government Printing Office would encourage more scientists to accept UFOs as a serious question. He expected that the one-day hearing would lead to extended hearings on the floor of Congress, but he was later disappointed. He was told that it was due to politics. That is, the general elections were coming up, and congressmen were more interested in seeking re-election than continuing hearings into UFOs. Next, please. But consider the word political in Webster's dictionary, and we find the usual synonyms up there. Next, please. But then consider the word politic and its adjective, political. And we find other synonyms: shrewdness, practical, sly. Now, what practical, shrewd, sly reason does our government or a group in government consider sufficient to withhold information about UFOs from the public? Meanwhile, the Common Committee was hard at work. The Air Force was sharing reports with them, as well as volunteer civilian researchers. But then the whole project began to fall apart. Condon wasn't an objective scientist. He delighted in interviewing the so-called contactees, who in the 50s and 60s were muddying ufological waters with their tales of blonde-haired, benevolent occupants who took them for rides around the moon and up to Venus and other planets, and never presenting any proof. But Condon gave talks to scientific groups about the contactees, and he purposely made his audiences laugh at the stories they told. He ignored the problem of physical UFOs altogether. Next, please. And then he wrote this article, UFOs I Have Loved and Lost, and this was published in a refereed scientific journal. And some members of Condon's staff found a memo written by Condon's assistant project coordinator, Robert Lowe. And this memo read in part, you probably know it, the trick would be, I think, to describe the UFO project so that to the public it would appear a totally objective study, but to the scientific community would present the image of a group of non-believers trying their best to be objective. Now, the few UFO researchers who knew about this memo didn't know what to do about it. But when McDonald got a copy of it, typically, he made sense of the mess. Please, next, please. At a meeting of scientists at the home of NICAP affiliate George Early, McDonald met journalist, can't figure out where this thing, John Fuller. Journalist John Fuller is, McDonald is on the left, unposed as usual, deep in thought. Next is Richard Hoagland, our Richard Hoagland. Then John Fuller, a prominent journalist and researcher, a scientist whom we're not sure of the name, but he disappeared very, very soon after from the field, and we never heard from him again, and Thornton Page at the end. Now, at a meeting of scientists, McDonald met journalist John G. Fuller, who'd written 2 outstanding books about UFOs. McDonald shared the Lowe memo with him because he felt that for the good of the American people, it should be made public. Next, please. Fuller published an article about the memo in Look magazine, which caused quite a stir. The final report of the Condon Committee was released in January 1969. Next, please. Now, Condon's conclusions were at the front of the 900-page report, and they stated flatly that UFOs were not worthy of further scientific study. As a result, the U.S. government abruptly terminated Project Blue Book. This dismayed McDonald, for he had hoped that the Air Force might improve the Blue Book staff and its operations with adequate scientists on the staff. McDonald had also worked towards setting up a nationwide tracking system to track UFOs through the sky. He discussed this with other UFO researchers who had similar ideas. McDonald proposed that if government, military, scientific, and public sources all work together openly, tracking UFOs, that indisputable evidence of their existence could be obtained, and therefore convince the scientific establishment at large. Now, this should be a priority now, in my opinion. Scientists and technicians in the field could set up a tracking system such as McDonald and others proposed, using modern satellite and astronomical technology. A public tracking system in which private citizens are fully involved. This should be set up as soon as possible. It is the best way to convince the scientific establishment and Congress that UFOs truly exist. Next, please. McDonald became the Condon Report's most outspoken critic. And here we are again, back to his professor look. At that time, 1969, his activities were being monitored. Strange cars without license plates followed him all around Tucson. His briefcase was stolen off an airliner, filled with confidential sightings that he'd gotten from military bases. Frequently, during his travels, his luggage was lost and then returned later, rifled through. He found out he was being impersonated by someone unknown who carried copies of his University of Arizona ID and his driver's license. The impersonator had been going around for months, warning UFO witnesses not to speak out openly because the government didn't want them to. Now, McDonald confided these troubling events as he learned about them to a few trusted colleagues and continued on. He was the first to read the Condon Report all the way through. And he found, to his delight, 30 outstanding UFO cases in the middle of that very thick book, which were listed as unexplained. Condon's staff had managed to slip them in, and Condon apparently hadn't even bothered to read his own report. Some of these cases had been obtained from Air Force files, but they hadn't been available at Blue Book when McDonald visited there. With considerable difficulty, he tracked some of these Air Force cases down. Notably, next please, the Lakenheath case, which had occurred in England on August 13th to the 14th, 1956. This is the first page of the very long government report, and I've enlarged it for what good it does. This case has recently received notice in some UFO journals, but was totally unknown to the field in 1969. As you probably know, the Lakenheath case sightings took place over RAF and United States Air Force bases in eastern England and involved objects traveling up to 4,000 miles per hour, caught by radar, both ground and airborne radar, viewed by pilots and by ground personnel. For hours, groups of UFOs came from the north over England and disappeared back over the North Sea. They were all excellent RV sightings. McDonald studied the original report and analyzed for the first time that he was looking at proof that Project Blue Book wasn't the only official government agency interested in UFOs, as the public had been brainwashed into thinking. There were official telexes from England to the Air Defense Command in Colorado Springs, and one of the telexes described the interception of a UFO by 2 RAF jets. This case was a breakthrough, proof that UFOs were an international problem and proof of a widespread cover-up, far more comprehensive than McDonald had believed. He distributed the Lakenheath case widely among the UFO field and the scientific community, and he made up his mind to write a book pointing out in detail that most of the Condon Report was false information paid for by public tax money, but that it also contained formerly unknown proof of UFO existence. Now, he started on his book. Suddenly, everything began to fall apart. In December 1969, the same month McDonald revealed the true facts of the 1956 Lakenheath case, NICAP was deliberately destroyed. Don Kehoe and then Assistant Director Gordon Lohr were abruptly fired by an executive committee of the Board of Directors. Now, this executive committee was led by a secret CIA agent who called himself Colonel Joseph Bryan, and Joseph Bryan had secretly wormed himself into this position of power. NICAP limped on ineffectually under the control of other secret CIA agents. By 1975, it was all over. It's all a matter of record now, but McDonald never knew what really happened. McDonald continued to break through other levels of secrecy. He'd been curious about the Tremonton, Utah UFO film, for instance. The Air Force and Condon had identified the numerous airborne objects in the film as a flock of birds. But McDonald learned from a trusted government official that the objects actually were large, unidentified, seemingly metallic craft performing intricate maneuvers. Now, then comes another mystery. In February of 1971, he told a fellow scientist, whom we all know, Dr. Robert M. Wood, that he was, quote, close to the truth about UFOs, and that he would soon be able to talk publicly about it. About the same time, he indicated to another trusted colleague, former NICAP staff member Marty Lohr, that he was, quote, talking with people on the highest level and felt that he would soon be able to reveal what the government knew about UFOs. Very shortly after this, McDonald became involved in scientific study of the ozone layer and the growing danger of pollutants. There's no time left here to give details, but they're all in the book. But McDonald testified at an open congressional hearing in February 1971 with 30 other scientists and environmentalists about the danger to the ozone layer. Now, during his hearing, he was subjected to persistent ridicule by Congressman Leon Conti. The ridicule had nothing to do with his testimony about the ozone layer, but about his UFO research. Now, McDonald repeatedly tried to get back on the subject, but Conti kept attacking his credibility in startling terms, stating that if he was to believe McDonald's ozone testimony, McDonald would have to prove his theory that there are little men flying around in the sky. And that's a quote. And we could put that graphic up if you want. Oh, I guess I removed that, I'm sorry. Now, this public ridicule of McDonald was reported nationwide, in contrast to the favorable media attention he had been given the last 5 years. This ridicule stunned and hurt him. But the same day, his final request for UFO research funding was turned down in an unmerciful manner, stunning him even more. He told a colleague privately, quote, "They won't let them say yes." And he seemed to understand at last why funding for UFO research had been denied him so many times. He never explained who they were, but I wonder if he was referring to the, quote, people on the highest level he had been talking to. When his private pocket notebooks are found, hopefully, perhaps we'll find answers. But McDonald bounced back and successfully defended his ozone research in later scientific meetings. His interest in UFOs continued, and he prepared a detailed outline of chapters for his book. But in ways not completely understood at present, he was being driven to a breaking point. The tragic events of the last 2 months of his life are too devastating. There's no time to describe them here. They're all in the book. He was found dead in an isolated section of his beloved Arizona desert on June 13th, 1971. There are many questions still unanswered about how and why he died. To his family and close colleagues, it was self-inflicted suicide. However, many in the UFO field suspected foul play, and some of us still suspect foul play. And my book, Firestorm, presents two logical hypotheses, and you can judge for yourself as to why and how he died. Now, was his depression brought on, at least partially, by orchestrated events, the promises of funding abruptly withdrawn, the monitoring activities, the puzzling impersonator, the public ridicule, the persons he was speaking with at the highest level? Then add his success in proving for the first time that some UFO incidents are international and classified by the U.S. government, along with other governments working together, an official cover-up. We must never forget what McDonald taught us. For UFO research to be scientific, we must work only with the best evidential data. Discard anything that is doubtful or unsubstantiated. It's only in this way that the scientific establishment and Congress will listen. Now, McDonald is UFO history, and those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. I've only had time to touch upon a few of the events in McDonald's UFO research life, but I've chosen the events that are most applicable to the question of government disclosure. It's been a great privilege to speak with you, and thank you.
Pretty amazing stuff, right? And it's hard to believe that that took place in 2004 at that expo. Now, what I'm excited to get into is the 2005 Expo Politics Expo, because at that expo, the conversation of Dr. James McDonald continues, but this time it includes Stanton Friedman, Brian Crissy, Stephen Bissett, and even his wife, Betsy McDonald. Before we get started, I think it's important to note that this came from the Australian government release, which means this isn't stuff I, copied off of some other server or something. This was downloaded directly from the government site. This is the information they had been holding on to that they thought was relevant, which means, in my opinion, that they believed Dr. McDonald was definitely onto something. Does it mean he was on to everything? No. But clearly it means that he had identified something and that they were possibly worried about getting out. And then you get into the questionable death thing, and it's like, God, one more person that was taken way too soon. And, if it was not self-inflicted, it's even more of a travesty. Okay, so here's the 05 Exopolitics Expo about Dr. James McDonald, forgotten hero of UFO science.
Just a couple of quick announcements before we get started on our fireside chat. David Serrata's presentation will be the last presentation in this room, track 2, and it may get started a little late. Also, Jaime Masson will get started a little later, around possibly no later than 3:40 in the next room, because the schedule, as you know, is running just a little behind, but we're going to make up for it in extremely rich content. And today we're so fortunate to have Betsy McDonald here. Originally scheduled in this time frame was Ann Druffel, the author of Firestorm, Dr. James McDonald's fight for UFO science. Unfortunately, she could not be here today. She hurt her shoulder and was unable to fly, so she's terribly disappointed and sends her regrets and good wishes for our replacement panel here today. But one door opens when another closes, as you know. Attending our conference this year, we're so honored to have the widow of Dr. McDonald, Dr. James McDonald, Betsy McDonald. She graduated from UC Berkeley in 1942, joined the Navy in World War II, where she met James McDonald at MIT while studying meteorology. They married in 1945. They had 6 children. She is a civil libertarian, anti-war activist, and socialist, and has many stories along those lines as well. But she is an amazing person. This is the first time that Betty McDonald has spoken publicly about her husband's extraordinary intersection with the power issues that this conference addresses, and I should say the issues that both of them addressed. We've chosen to couch this format in the form of a fireside chat. Thought you would enjoy that. The only thing we're missing is a fireside, but we have enough fire in the room to make up for that. And this will be focused on the legacy of Jim McDonald. Betsy will be joined by Stanton Friedman, Brian Chrissy, the publisher of Firestorm, and Stephen Bassett, who will moderate this wonderful special discussion. So without further ado, I turn it over to Stephen Bassett.
Thank you, Cheryl. Doesn't she do a wonderful job? She's a professional, believe me. This is really amazing. I had no idea that would happen this way. I do feel very bad for Anne. She really, really wanted to be here. As you know from last year, those of you who were here, I read that book. I don't get a chance to read many books, and I've got hundreds of them. They're coming in all the time. I read that one for some reason, and it had enormous impact on me, because this was a story that cut to the heart of this 57-year period. And so Anne came out and talked about it at the last X conference, and we invited her again, and we invited Betsy to join us, and she was happy to come, and Anne couldn't make it. And Betsy sort of got a little rambunctious and said, maybe we could talk a little ourselves, and so we've added some people here to do that, all right? So I'm going to get this off by asking, a couple of questions. Stanton has personal experience with both Betsy and her husband, and of course Brian Chrissy knows much more about the book in greater detail than I do. But let me ask the first question, Betsy. You have watched all of this go on for the full 57 years, from 47 on, and you watched it from the perspective of an activist, someone that was out there engaging the issues, right? And many of them unpopular at the time. So you've seen that happen. Of course, you understand the history of your husband and all of this, and then you've seen the aftermath for 30 more years. What is your sense about this emerging group of people with this extraordinary interest? How do you see it?
Well, I'm very impressed. In the very early Okay. Okay. In the very early days, I didn't see the caliber of the people that I see here. Oh, okay. I didn't see the caliber. It seemed like, for me, I was a skeptic myself and very doubtful. It seemed to me like some of the other people that spoke were kooks. I'm sorry to say it. But I don't see that here.
Next question. I'm going to ask Stanton a question. Stanton had an intersection with this in a history here, and I thought maybe he would elaborate. By the way, he also has a front comment in this book. Stanton, tell us a little bit about how you interacted with Dr. McDonald.
We had a very active group of researchers in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, back in the late 60s. We'd originally been a NICAP subcommittee, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Then we went on our own because we didn't like to be pushed around by Don Kehoe. So we set up our own group, and it was a bunch of us worked for Westinghouse, some of us worked for other companies in town. It was all professional people. And we established a good rapport with the media, and I don't know who made the original contact with Jim, but he would stop by on his way from Washington or someplace else. And he spoke at Westinghouse one time. He met with our group. He gave us permission to use his paper, UFOs, the Greatest Scientific Problem of Our Time. And around the work table of the biggest accounting firm in Pittsburgh, downtown on the umpteenth floor of a building there, we all assembled 1,000 copies of that, which he allowed us to sell so we could make enough money to afford a 24-hour answering service and things like that. And Jim was a model for us. We weren't, well, one of the guys was an academic, but the rest of us weren't. And we were galvanized by his willingness to dig into things. He checked things out first. He met with Kehoe. He checked his investigations. They looked solid. He met with other people. He went to Project Blue Book, was astonished to find that there was so much good material there. And he had the guts to speak out when most other people wouldn't. He spoke to the American Association of Newspaper Editors, some title like that, here in Washington, down the road, and caused quite a stir down there. One of the things that characterized Jim was his willingness to use his knowledge of atmospheric physics to treat the explanation of the nasty, noisy negativist, he wouldn't have called him that, but I can, who came up with explanations like Donald Menzel or Philip Klass that seemed quasi-scientific. Ball lightning, plasma balls, temperature inversions. Now, Jim was an atmospheric physicist, and he went at it quantitatively. Unlike Alan Hynek, whom I also knew, Jim was able to destroy these phony explanations. You know, if a temperature inversion explanation required 8 degrees of temperature inversion and the weather records say it was 2, it doesn't hold. And Klass's plasma explanations were easily dismissed. And Jim wrote about these things. He put out a whole bunch of these papers, 20 pages or so, small print, double column, some of them, a lot of information. And he spoke, he was the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics lecturer one year, spoke at sections across the country, great crowds. He published 2 articles in Aeronautics and Astronautics. And the place where I really appreciated him were the congressional hearings of 1968. Jim was the power behind those. 6 scientists testified in person, including Jim and Alan Hynek and Carl Sagan and James Harder from the University of California and so forth. My congressman was on the committee that was holding those hearings, and after talking to Jim and checking with Westinghouse first, I was able to submit an article and my testimony to those hearings. It's included in the report, but Jim's paper, which I've been touting ever since, he talks about 41 separate cases. It's a 71-page paper in full text. I've been selling copies. I'm out of it, so I'm not putting in a promotion here. But I point to it as the best single paper of which I'm aware with lots of good sightings. Multiple witness cases, radar visual sightings, sightings in big cities, sightings by astronomers, meteorologists. Anybody who tells you there are no good reports is, first of all, full of baloney, and second, needs to be given a copy of Jim's paper. So I've used his name in my lectures since about 1970. And I have another connection here. I met with him in Pittsburgh, but when Jim died, I had a number of calls from well-intentioned people telling me, the government got Jim and you're going to be next, Stan. You better watch out. These weren't threatening. They were people who were concerned about my well-being. So I thought I ought to check into what did happen with Jim. The rumors were flying, and I'm sure Betsy heard some of them. I talked to Betsy. I talked to her daughter. I got the real story. It was truly a suicide, as far as we know. The government had no role in it, right?
Yes.
And one of the things I was surprised me and pleased me when I got the book to read was that I thought Anne covered his suicide so accurately, so carefully, so well done. And I have always been grateful since the book came out that I can refer people to it. Because I still hear, oh, the government took him out, Stan. The government didn't take him out. It was a great loss to all of us who were serious about ufology. And I'll add one more note. In the, what was his name? Peter Jennings, I think was his name, did a television show recently.
Your good friend.
Yeah, my good buddy. Yeah, we share the same birthday, and we're both Canadian Americans, and that's about it, folks. Anyway, that they would make it sound as if J. Allen Hynek was the light in the wilderness, fighting the battle on his own to get the word out. And that was frankly baloney. I knew Alan, I knew Jim. There's no question Jim was getting the word out and Alan was not. So that was the final offense. There were other things about the show that you might think I was unhappy about, and that would be right. But that one was a totally misleading picture.
Thank you. I'm gonna come back though to a point that he made a little later. But next question I want to give to Brian. Brian, you published the book. The James's story is out there for a long, long time, but no one really saw or took up the mantle. So give us a little brief description of how this book came about.
Yes, Anne had been working on this for years and years, and she had accumulated an enormous amount of information, original documents, all manner of things, through her access to Dr. McDonald's private files. She had a working relationship with Dr. McDonald during these critical years and had been given the permission after he died to go into his files, get out his journals, his notebooks, his everything that he had written, and put it together. And she'd been working on this tirelessly for years and years and years. And she finally came to us as publishers in the UFO area and presented this to us. And as I read through it, it was just absolutely clear that, you know, two things. One was that this was a dusty, dark, unilluminated corner of the history of our fight for truth about UFOs and the alien presence on Earth. There was so much here that needed to be known and was not known. Second thing that was clear to me was, we're not going to make any money on this. This is a good book. And it's an expensive book. It's $34. We got it on sale for $30 here at the conference. But when she brought it to us, it was clear it had to come out. So we brought it out basically as a public service to bring up this man's name in the proper context and give him some of the rewards that he was so rudely denied during his life. And so we are pleased to bring this out into the world. And I'd like to add a little footnote to the discussion about whether the government did him in. I believe he really did kill himself. It was a two-stage process. He shot himself in the eye at one point, went blind, went through another thing, finally did it, and Betts tells us that he was very intent on doing this, and I believe all that. But from another perspective, a little further back, I think one has to roll into the equation the role of the Phil classes and the people who were denigrating his work, embarrassing him, cutting his funding, doing everything they could to make his life miserable. That was part of why he was in the state that led him to what he did. And so I'm not sure who all was behind that, but I can't exonerate all of them. I think there was some responsibility for this that went beyond his own instability, which was definitely there.
Quick question.
I have a little to add about the book, how it started. I was living in Los Angeles, and I met Anne. And Anne had a friend who wanted to do a television show. She wanted to do a show, basically, about how the CIA killed Mac. And so I had to say, well, that wasn't true. The CIA didn't do it. So, but I said, and I don't like the idea of a sensational TV show. I said, Anne, a book would be better. And that's how Anne got started on the book. And I helped her through the years, and I did go edit everything she wrote. I mean, I looked over it and made any corrections. And I authorized it. That's what the authorization means. So that's how I helped her.
Where's the co-authorship here? You should be co-author on here.
Well, she said that. She said, Betsy, it should be both of us. And I said, no, Anne, you wrote the book. It's you. But that's how it did start.
I'd like to mention, this is not a UFO book, all right? Let's be clear about this. This is not a UFO book. This is a intellectual history, all right, of a very important person in a very important time, all right? And let me tell you, this is Paul Davids here? Paul, are you here? He had finished up. He had to go out. This is a movie. All right, this is a movie and a half, and it's got to get done. Don't know how, don't know who'll do it, but someone's going to do that. All right, now I want to turn to something really important now, Betsy. You and your husband raised 6 children, and they literally grew up. Tell me that's not me. By the way, have I told you to make sure your cell phones are off? It's extremely disruptive when you don't turn those off, so please do that. They literally grew up from the time they were children, 2 or 3 years old, and grew up through the period that he discovers, gets into, gets deeply involved with, and then exits from this issue. And I'm sure it must have had a very significant effect on them. How are those children doing today? Tell us a little bit about each one.
Well, children don't always follow what their parents do, so my oldest son is a physics professor at Princeton, and my second daughter is a post office worker in Ukiah. She's also very interested in exercises and teaching people health. My third son is a computer worker, as many. My fourth is a teacher. My fifth, I'm down to Gail. She's a medical doctor. And my sixth is a graphic artist.
And they're doing well.
And they're all doing well. And they're all doing well. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. They had a happy childhood.
Well, they did. And the book makes that quite clear. Think about this for a second. James McDonald and Betsy McDonald not only gave an incredible contribution to the most important issue, but they raised 6 highly accomplished, highly educated children who went on to be important adults. Understand how that makes me feel whenever anybody in the mainstream or in the critical debunking world tries to make a point that the people that address this issue in some way are deficient or somehow not capable of discerning properly what's going on and what's not going on. It was always poppycock. It's still poppycock. And I think if you kind of watch things that are happening, like the Jennings documentary, you find that their assertions increasingly are obviously ludicrous. And eventually they're going to go away altogether. Now, another question, Betsy. Do you were an activist who took up some interesting and difficult causes. You are what would be, Rush Limbaugh would consider you fairly left of center, all right? If you were active today, probably Rush would be talking about you on a regular basis. You were a very strong person in terms of human rights, in terms of peace, anti-war. You even went so far as to support socialism, which in a proper context is quite interesting. I kind of like it, and there's a certain amount of it in Canada, and Canada gets more appealing to me all the time. But you were.
Take that flag with
you. But you know what it's like to take on the causes. You know, the Quixotean cause where you're kind of up against the state, and a lot of people are against you. Your husband went through the same thing, right? Was this your karma? Is this? Do you feel like that this was the role that you were supposed to play, to take on the great powers and so forth? And have you given any thought to getting back in the game?
I am in the game.
Okay, can you tell us what you tell us? Tell us some things that you're doing politically, please, or just in the activism world, anything like that.
Well,
are you still causing trouble back there? That's what I want to know.
Well, I'm a Marxist, and I'm in a political party, the Socialist Workers' Party, which is a working class party. And I do work on the campus, and I do work in this party has a press called the Pathfinder Press with 350 books or more, and I work on that project. It's all computerized, and there's a lot of work that is involved with that. And I'm on the campus with young socialists. Yes.
You remarkably, I mean, this is a woman remarkably vital, active, right? Clearly someone who never gave up, right? Not a question. Let me ask you, as someone that someone clearly has a strong political perspective that is well to the center, as you watched America evolve in the last 20, 25 years, do you see the emergence of secrecy in these massive security structures? Did you see these kinds of things coming when you were a young activist, and how do you view them after all these years? I mean, are these really danger? How much of a danger do you see that to the country and its future?
Well, the United States is the major imperialist power in the world, and it has this secrecy, it has this military, you know. So we're all up against it. It's an international question, and you know, it's the fight. It's the fight we're all in. One of the previous speakers talked about how to really get the truth out, and so that the public really understands the questions of extraterrestrials. He used the term revolution. He did. Well, that's a Marxist term, too.
It's an interesting point now, isn't it? Because without question, all ideologies, particularly those which are intensely and internally focused, okay, which of course is a definition of xenophobia, which has many degrees of intensity, all such internally focused nationalisms and xenophobias will be in an extremely precarious position at the point that all aware human beings on the planet, easily above 3 billion, 4 billion, because there's about 1 billion or so that struggle just to live every day and they have no time for anything else, learn that the galaxy is loaded with civilizations. It's awful lot harder to play that internal, inside focused. You have to open up, right? You become global. You become more of a unitary species, and a lot of that gets into some of the most powerful ideas that I could not obviously be realized in a proper fashion in the 20th century, that lies behind collectivism, socialism, and so forth. Let's not get into the high ideology stuff and some of the heavy history. Let's just talk about how we live and how you approach life. So it's possible that disclosure and even contact, you might be back really in the game, Betty, and your ideas may suddenly reemerge in a totally new context, but with great power. Because if someone says, no, 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 nationalism, how many people have walked in front of a microphone and said, this is the way it needs to be, and if we do it, it'll last for 1,000 years, right? It usually never lasts for more than about 10 years, maybe 70 if they're lucky. We may be dealing with civilizations that have held together for 100,000 years. Stanton, have you got some more thoughts that have come up as we, what would you like to add something at this point?
I visited Betsy, my goodness, over 30 years ago to look at Jim's papers with Richard Greenwell, who was based there in Arizona. And I remember being so impressed that Jim's files were in such great shape. You could find things, he documented stuff, he kept track of things. I mean, he had a secretary at the office, didn't he? Which I didn't, but I'm glad my wife didn't see them because she'd give me a hard time about the way my files are. Jim was well organized, he was systematic, and he was thorough. I mean, you'd get a case of an airplane crew, a military crew, and he'd talk to every one of the members of the crew. He'd track them down and go after them. And I had to admire that. His tenacity was a model for me, and in a sense influenced my approach to Roswell. I remember telling Jim that in the Socorro, New Mexico case, a woman had approached me after I spoke to the American Nuclear Society group in Las Vegas, that she had been at the university, New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, and she'd been asked to do a secret project on analyzing some glass-like soil that had been found there for the department. So I passed that on to Jim because I was in New Brunswick or someplace else anyway. I certainly wasn't in Arizona or New Mexico. And sure enough, Jim followed up on it. He talked to her, he got the information. It turns up in somebody's book, maybe Dick Hall's, I'm not sure whose. But the fact that he would go after things, not knowing how they were going to turn out, not knowing whether it was worth the effort, but trying. And I tried to use that as a model in my Roswell research. You go after something, you don't know whether that person's got a story for you or not, and even if they have a story, whether they're telling the truth or not, but go for it. That was Jim's approach. Go for it. Check it out. It doesn't always work. Okay, that's the price you pay. But Jim was the best example of a serious UFO researcher that I'm aware of. And I've been at this since 1958. I guess that dates me a little bit. But Jim became, for me, a very strong model in how he went at things. And you'll see my comments about it in the first part of the book, the first page inside.
Yeah, it's worth noting that a number of researchers were influenced by James McDonald, significantly. Stan Friedman was one of them. But Robert Wood is another, and Robert Wood is speaking here. All right? And there were several others. So there's a legacy here that extends well beyond the work of the time. It hasn't stopped. And of course, he will get the proper recognition in time for that. We do affect other people's lives, particularly when we follow an activist path, an action path. I have always held my highest admirations, not for the people who criticize, certainly, not for the people who sit back and deliberate. I hold my highest regard for the people who act. They sometimes get it wrong, and they sometimes make mistakes. But the people who act are the people that have made this world today, not the people that simply theorized about it. Brian, go ahead.
Yes, there's one aspect to James McDonald that becomes very clear in this book, and it's a real example for all of us to learn from. And I don't know exactly what word to put on it. A poor choice of a word would be naive. But there's got to be a better word for it because it came from a high place in James. And an example of it was when he began to look into the Blue Book Project and the Condon Report and these other activities and reports that came out during those days. And he would find, for example, that the conclusions didn't match what was inside the reports, that the best reports weren't even mentioned, on and on and on, swamp gas, blah, blah, blah. His natural inclination was not cover up and all this stuff. It was, there's got to be a foul-up here. There's got to be a foul-up. Somebody made a mistake here. How can we correct this? Okay, here is the real evidence. This is what we need to look at. Let's get science on this. Let's take it to the government. And when he would do that, these invisible walls would rise up, and he would be bounced back time and time again. And this foul-up versus cover-up thing, in my opinion, really emerged through Jim's work. It was inevitable coming out of his lifetime of careful deliberation and experience and evidence and research into all of this information that there had to be something going on other than a foul-up. But it was interesting to see how deeply he believed in the sanctity of the U.S. government. My government would not lie to me. Science will illuminate the truth here. Let's clean up the foul-ups and apply science to the evidence, because the evidence is there. Why can't they see the evidence? Why? He didn't understand. And maybe Betts, you have a few thoughts about his uncertainty about the foul-up versus the cover-up and where that came from. How did he deal with that?
Well, yeah, he did talk about, is this a foul-up or is it a cover-up? He didn't say it outright, it's a cover-up. Yeah, he was like a creature. He believed in the philosophy of the Enlightenment days, where if you told the truth and people would believe it and act on it, the government would act on it. So that's why some people called him being like a Don Quixote, because he wasn't understanding how the nature of the way the government had become, that there was so much cover-up of the material.
Let's be absolutely clear about this. There is no shame in a citizen of this country believing deeply that their government would not lie about something of great magnitude, of life and death and worldview and creation. The shame is with the government that it would ever dare to think that we do not deserve to have the truth and that it's not our right to have it. and that they would deny it. That is where the shame is. It is not with those who trust too well.
Yes, Mac always thought the people believe in democracy. You know, and so that's the way he thought. You know, the people do believe in democracy.
They do believe. My great concern is that the day may arrive sooner than we think that they may not believe anymore. Let me ask you, have you, I know we've had 7, 8, actually we have 8 camera crews here doing a lot of interviews. Have they interviewed you at all? Have you had one?
Paula.
Paul interviewed you? Okay. Well, you know, it's very possible that you're going to get some more offers to interview with some of these teams. Are you willing to do a few more tomorrow if they would like to talk to you?
Be okay.
Okay. Well, let's take it up the next notch then, Betsy. It's possible that, you know, you might suddenly become on the radar of some people out there in the media and may want to talk about your husband's life. You think you might be willing to do that on the big screen? Not the big screen, but, you know, I mean, if they want to come and talk?
I'm not anxious for that.
Not anxious for that. Well, you know, it's funny how, you know, when that world wants to come to you, they sort of show up. But I give you a little warning, beware, right? Because you have a wonderful story to tell, an extraordinary story to tell. What is the time right now? What do we have? 3:34. Well then, okay. We have to close because Jaime Maussan's presentation is very long. Look, Anne is not here. I think there was going to be some books, so the only books are available in the vendor room, but...
They're right outside.
Oh, you have some too? You do have some. Okay, look. Oh, yeah, Cranit, publisher, brought a bunch. You simply have to have this book. You simply have to have this book. If you care about this subject, you have to read this book. Because this is the personal, the real. This is where it really matters, okay? Here. You understand this, you will understand the truth embargo. You will understand the history. You will understand what people now are going through and why we want to make sure that all those who pursue this issue are able to take it all the way. And there's no possibility that they will be thwarted, that they will ultimately prevail. There's no shame in not prevailing either, because he did prevail, as a matter of fact. Many, many great things in this history, in our lives and in history, have happened over many generations, right? So there will be a time when he will be acknowledged. But this is the one book I think a person has got to have if they care about the personal part of this. So please, take advantage of this opportunity. Betsy is going to be a little more available, I hope. I'm gonna maybe even give her I don't know. Yeah, you have a table. You have a table out there? You don't have a table. Did I not give you a table? Oh, she's at Ann Druffel's table. That's right. So she's out at the table. So I'm going to try to get her to hang out at the table. Those of you who have not looked at Marxism appropriately, this is your opportunity. I want you to come up. I want you to get some information. You don't know where things are going right now. So maybe get a little expand your political thinking. But it has been wonderful to have Betsy here. You'll be seeing a little more of her this evening at the banquet. So let's take a few minutes and then get those tickets, because you're going to need them. And please come for the next presentation by Jaime Maussan. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay.
Wonderful. That was the best endorsement I've ever had. Any book you were involved.
You too want to get, before you leave this weekend, a quick interview with you on camera. Anytime.
Your wish is my command, my dear.
Okay.
You guys can hang around out here and endorse some books.
hidden away in an underground archive are row upon row of files few have seen. The life's work of history's greatest UFO hunter. And they may contain proof that we are not alone.
He was the first man to take hard science into the UFO phenomenon and bring it into the scientific community.
Today, McDonald's legacy lives on in the archives of the University of Arizona, an untapped resource of UFO investigation and evidence.
There's a massive amount of material here. The collection is extensive, very meticulously detailed handwritten notes. We've got film, video, physical artifacts. There could be some pretty interesting information.
1954, the Arizona desert outside of Tucson. Near sunset, James E. McDonald, a senior physicist at the University of Arizona, is driving through the expansive desert with 4 meteorologists. Off in the distance, McDonald notices a strange point of light hovering above the mountains. The bright anomalous object appears to be made of aluminum. He points it out to his colleagues, but none of the men are able to identify it. It disappears without much of a reaction. Little do these men know, but this mysterious sighting has just changed the course of UFO history. After his death in 1971, physicist James McDonald left behind an amazing array of files, precise notes, photos, audio files, and other evidence meticulously collected over years of research into UFO phenomena. The files are the culmination of 17 years of work by McDonald. He began assembling them in 1953 while a professor at the University of Arizona. Within McDonald's files, cases originally conducted by Project Blue Book are reopened. His research uncovers some of the first proof that the CIA was investigating UFOs. His documents revealed the possibility that the Air Defense Command, Air Force Intelligence, and even the Strategic Air Command were involved in UFO incidents. His conclusion? The public is being deceived. Project Blue Book was the Air Force's official program studying UFO phenomena until 1968, when the Condon Committee, headed by physicist Edward Condon, determined that UFO research was unlikely to yield any serious results. Blue Book was abandoned 2 years later, in 1970, but James McDonald believed Condon's conclusions were highly flawed and showed a blatant disregard for the high number of unexplained incidents. Given today's extraordinary leaps forward in technology and scientific analysis, James McDonald's investigation into UFO phenomena would only have gotten stronger. But tragically, he committed suicide in 1971, his personal life unraveling as he pushed forward with his scientific studies of UFOs. Now, his legacy and his tireless work live on, with other cases awaiting new investigations, and more answers still waiting to be discovered.
Wild, right? Like those are the segments the Australian government decides to keep. It's just very strange. We were talking about this FBI file earlier, and we're going to get into this a little bit. Just thinking about what we just watched there. So essentially, in 2004, the biographer that, wrote the book on James McDonald, Andrew Fell, says essentially there's a lot of evidence indicating that Dr. McDonald was kind of getting messed with. She talked about his briefcase getting stolen, documents getting taken, things getting shuffled around inside of his briefcase. someone pretending to be him, running around town, talking to contacts he had previously made, telling them not to talk. So very, being followed by cars that seem strange. So very weird activity going on before his supposed suicide. This is the FBI memorandum / file that was kept on Dr. McDonald. And, just a few things going through it I wanted to note is that the FBI, if you go through this paperwork here, they explicitly label Dr. McDonald as a national security concern. So he was not treated as like some kind of crazy person or a crank or something like that. They monitored him mainly because he was a prominent atmospheric physicist. He was saying that UFOs were real, like actual structured craft, and he was questioning the Air Force, their honesty as far as Project Blue Book and other reports about UFOs were going. So what he was facing in public as far as scrutiny goes, and what Andrew Fell got into a little bit about the congressional hearing that was supposed to be about the ozone layer, where this senator starts ripping into him about believing in aliens, even though it had nothing to do with what the hearing was about. So it wasn't ridicule. They were concerned, and so they wanted to attack his credibility. They wanted to attack his level to influence like-minded people by trying to make him look crazy. That was the playbook in the 60s. And to a degree, it's still the playbook today. You can have these UFO witnesses come forward with all kinds of evidence to back their claims, but it won't matter. It won't matter. So the FBI acknowledged that he's a legitimate scientist. You can go through the documents here. You can see that they acknowledge his standing, that he holds respect in the scientific community, and that he's a serious scientist. He does not like a fringe personality. And you start reading the document, you see that there's discomfort with his conclusions, but there's not a dismissal of his competence or of his science. So the government knew he was credible, and that made him dangerous, because now you have a credible scientist saying UFO craft are real and they're in the skies. He made statements saying that they were extraterrestrial as well. So if you go through the file, it states that McDonald believed UFOs were physical craft. They were not explained by known technology, and they could be extraterrestrial. This belief, when held by a NASA-connected physicist, automatically triggers monitoring by the FBI. This confirms belief itself was treated as a security issue and not evidence. Is that still the same? Do we know everything there is to know, or is there still a line we can't cross that we can't talk about? The FBI in this file actively redacted material saying that it was on the grounds of national security. And you can find a paragraph that explicitly is withheld under executive order secrecy. And then the document openly admits that the material was removed. So the authors even question what was deleted and why. But we don't get to read what was deleted. And what's more probably troubling is that we know it was under executive order. His research was shared internationally. That means that it was expanding beyond the US, beyond Australia, and he was getting interest from foreign or allied agencies. Australia's later preservation of McDonald's material included all of this stuff that we've been reviewing, including this FBI document. And this gets into the Five Eyes level information flow that the UAP UFO issue is not just a United States issue. It's a worldwide issue. And that makes complete sense if we're talking about craft that traverse space. I don't think they're too worried about the continent. Maybe the location, if there's significance to it. You go through the document, the FBI basically admits that Project Blue Book was inadequate. That they could have done better, they could have staffed it better, they could have financed it better, and that essentially Dr. McDonald's criticism of them was 100% accurate, and that his objectives that he had to the work that they were doing had reason. The funny thing is they don't really offer a counter argument, only concern about impact that it may cause. So it's bureaucratic silence, not scientific rebuttal. Very close to what we see today. Much of the file focuses on his personality, who he's associated with, and the influence that he has. There's absolutely no scientific debunking of any of his claims. It sounds familiar, right? It sounds like what's happening with modern whistleblowers, that they attack the person and their credibility and not the data. The FBI was concerned about public reaction, not the truth. There's repeated emphasis on public perception, the media exposure, the impact on the confidence of the institutions that we have in the United States. And it strongly suggests that they were more interested in information control and not error correction. It's narrative management before the term even existed. And after reviewing the file, kind of going through everything, highlighting everything, you can sort of read between the lines. But I will make this definitive statement that the FBI didn't monitor James McDonald because he was wrong. They monitored him because he was a credible scientist and he was saying something that they couldn't control. And as we look at the road these whistleblowers and future whistleblowers have ahead of them, we have to take that into account. That folks have gone down this road, folks have tried this, And what happens? Their story ends in tragedy, and their files become declassified 60 years later. And you find out, oh, there was a whole lot more to this than we thought. Are we going to have to wait another 50 years for the Amy Eskridge file that the FBI says they don't have, despite FOIA requests? It's a crazy world, y'all, when the government can just make up the rules as they go. And it seems like it's getting more and more that way every single day. We got to keep questioning the narrative and keep our heads on a swivel. And before we go, I think what we're going to do is watch the Spielberg trailer one more time, because I got to admit, I'm a little excited for this, right? This movie looks pretty dang cool. And does Spielberg know like something we don't know? He's talked about folks that he's consulted with. We know Grush is one of them, and we know other experiencers and witnesses have had something to do with this film. So we're going to check out this trailer one more time and then sign.